what's interesting with Spitting Image, I was I was trying to make Mrs. Thatcher as real as possible when I did her, but Mrs. Thatcher had to look like that character you've seen. So what I did then was borrow the voice of the House of Commons, which had a slightly more steely approach. The right honourable gentleman doesn't understand the nature of fiscal policy. So that slightly more steely voice was added to the voice on of the puppet in order to give it that steely approach. I'm going to leave you with a couple of jokes of Mrs. Thatcher. These are very, very rare jokes, but I shall share them with you because we've had no sense of Mrs. Thatcher's humour. She didn't understand jokes. She didn't get jokes. She famously couldn't tell them, and she didn't understand their structure. But to be fair to her, she did have occasional one-line riposte that give an indication of her character. One was that she was asked to sign a European communique about xenophobia. And Mrs. Thatcher, bless her, did not know what the word xenophobia meant. So her assistant said, it means hatred of foreigners, Margaret. And she said, oh, well, that's all right then. But my favourite one, which has not been in any of the press, and I'll leave you with this, it's my favourite story of Margaret Thatcher, and I remember it happening. Roy Hattersley, who I also did on Spitting Image, was the actual character who did all the spitting. Neil Kinnock was away, and it was end of term, and he was asking Margaret Thatcher a question, as a stand-in was Roy Hattersley, and he stood up in Parliament and said, Mrs. Thatcher, can you make a comment on the present economic situation, which is clearly in decline? I remember this was the last day of term. So Mrs. Thatcher got up at the dispatch box and looked at him and said, the Right Honourable is completely incorrect. Inflation is falling. Unemployment is falling. Last day of term, she then looked at him and said, etc., etc., etc. So on that note, etc., 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 that was a brief indication of my experience of Margaret Thatcher. God bless her.